for the most part, the only piece that he didn't want us to worry about the ISLIC standard correlation piece.
That's fine.
But I mean, now as far as straight across, not 100%. All right. Thank you for being here, for making the case for the nickel. This is a little bit about the why make the case for the nickel. That I think we're at a point where I think most people understand the need for the nickel. This is more about the how, thinking about looking at districts who have levied the nickel and their thought process behind it to try and come up with patterns for those that were successful, so the people that are interested in looking at this know what they need to do. You can go to the next one. Again, the introduction, this, everybody's having to, tighten up with their spending. That's where this has come from. Everybody looking at additional revenue sources, and the recallable nickel is the pathway that a lot have gone, especially because of the fact that, school construction, you'll come into a project that, in the case of Scott County particularly, or in the case of any district, a lot of these projects cost a lot of money. As a result of the cost of these projects, they're pretty difficult to take on. As much funding as they can find, the more the better on that. Literature review. So with this, you're not surprised, I'm sure, that, better facilities equals better results. There's research out there to support that. I don't really know what else to tell you about that other than it's crystal clear. There's no concern with that. But that's not where I focused most of my literature review on, because again, I felt like this was kind of self-explanatory. Some of the research was research that we compiled in looking at what we needed to make the case for us with a recallable nickel. This is just a graph. This isn't anything crazy. This is just looking at what we call the Big 15, which are the Big 15 districts. They're the 15 largest districts outside of Fayette and Jefferson County. And those two districts, beyond those Big 15, this is the unmet district need that you can find on the district facility plan, again, by district. And you can see for us why this was such a big piece of information. We are number one with over $200 million in unmet need. This is something, just throwing that out there as something to consider. You got to look at all pieces of data. This might not work for another district, but this worked really well for us.
And when it came to district size, we're about 10 or 11 out of the Big 15, right?
Right. Yeah, we're not necessarily at the top. We're not necessarily all the way at the top, but yes, as far as district size, we're further towards the bottom, which further, illustrates it. But I felt like for the community, just, it made sense for the community to throw out Lexington and Louisville, because everybody gets that they're just different.
Different tax rates.
So to put them in the 15 regardless, and to know that, bam, 206 when the next closest is 130. I mean, that's just.
Do we have this graph? I don't know if this is messing up your presentation. Do
No,
we
you're
have
fine.
this graph, like with that student population there as well to kind of show? That would be good.
Yeah, that would be easy to. And again, this further illustrates the point that there's not necessarily a silver bullet one document out there that works for everybody, and that's kind of
Because Davies is in this biennium's cohort, and they wouldn't have done that because they're 13 from, they're second from the bottom.
Yep.
Right.
You go on the next one. With this, just all the different types of local funding for schools construction, there are plenty. The FSPK, we'll talk about that real quick. The growth nickel, second growth nickel. The recallable nickel is where we're really focusing a lot of our conversation today. The equalized facility funding nickel, and then the BRAC nickel and the Category 5 nickel. So we'll talk about those just really briefly. I'm not going to get into whole lot of detail with that, but this is interesting in terms of looking at where your district is in this, and also when we get to the C calculations, I'll show where people can look if they're interested in seeing what nickels they have, if there's any confusion on that.
Do you add a slide because the 2017 budget language forbids future equalization, right? Remember, that was the deal. Okay.
We're good, we're good.
Okay.
All right, next one. Again, like I was talking about the FSPK, and a lot of this information for each type of funding source is available on the Kentucky Department of Education. So a couple keywords and you can get a lot of this same information, and you can get more than that if you need. I would say too that Che Ritter has been very helpful every step along the way, even before this project started, with questions that I had about, well, hey, what about this? And well, it doesn't really say it, but is this nickel no longer active? Is this something we could go after? And he was really helpful with some of the details that you couldn't find. But every district levies the FSPK. They had to levy the FSPK in order to be eligible for receiving SFCC offers from the state, which we all know that's wonderful free money that we can throw at our projects. And I believe it's every year that they're sharing with us an offer. And again, that goes towards funding our school construction projects.
You might have done this in the last slide, I didn't pay attention, where it says school, you've got SFCC, kind of what that, did you have FS?
Yeah, it was on the
So it was
yep,
previous.
yep.
Just for those.
Yep. The original growth nickel, this is one of those that not necessarily everybody has. We have it in Scott County though, and the original growth nickel was meeting this category of meeting this threshold of growth within your district. And I believe this was in the 90s where it kind of started, and a lot of districts jumped on this. So this gave you another bunch of funding. Franklin County, where I spent a lot of my time, didn't. They did not get the original growth nickel. And I've been trying to get a hold of a previous superintendent that was there when that time took place, because the lore of things, you keep hearing, oh, well, back in the day we missed out on different tax sources, and now we can't get it. And I'm led to believe that the original growth nickel we were eligible for in Franklin County, but the board opted not to go after it because we had a very conservative board chair that steered in that direction.
So
not 100% sure.
So what would the board have to do to get that original nickel? Match it? It's a matching type of situation? What would they have had to do?
The second one got equalized, right?
Yeah,
Nothing they can do now.
Yeah, it's gone now. It's gone. It was one of those, you're in or you're not. And then I believe that they didn't. Yeah, they just kind of allowed for this. They didn't really say how long it lasts. But this has just been. This is one of those things that they could out of nowhere say, oh, well, we're not gonna, we're no longer honoring that, and blow everybody's mind. But they've just been letting.
I mean, they could say they could do let's do a lost mine mineral tax nickel. They could say, okay, we'll provide this opportunity, not subject to recall, if you want a nickel in your community because you've met this. That's what it did. Yeah.
Go to the next one. So if you qualified for the first growth nickel, well then guess what? You were eligible for the second or equalized growth nickel, and this is another one of those that, like I said, Franklin County in particular missed out on because they missed out on the first, so they missed out on the second. Scott County, we in fact have the second growth nickel. So again, more funding for our school districts. You can go on to the next one. Recallable nickel. That's essentially the nickel in question for this. And what is the recallable nickel? It's basically it's 5 cents for every $100 of assessed value. But it's not a true 5 cents. Dr. Hub's been good about explaining when is a nickel, not a nickel, because you've got people that through the Homestead Act, and you've got people through other routes that aren't a part of that. So they're, in order to capture what would be like a 5%, or I'm sorry, a 5 cents on $100, that requires everybody else to pay a little more, which is where you get to I think we're at like maybe 5.7 cents is what ours is. And you'll see that with some of the slides coming up, where it's 5.8, 5.9, 5.6 for others, because that's kind of how it works out. You can go on to the next one. I think you skipped one. I think go back one. This is where we're spending a lot of our talk, is just with the recallable nickel. It's called the recallable nickel because it is eligible for recall through petition and then vote. And this has, you got all these different House bills aligned to it, and basically all the House bills go with is the fact that the state provides equalization for this nickel. The amount of equalization they have provided over the years has decreased. So what we're seeing is, depending on when people got in, depends on what kind of equalization they're looking at. And in fact, as mentioned, the last piece on this slide is that at the time of this presentation, at the time of today, it's legit that they're no longer allowing equalization for the recallable nickel. So, that leads to the question of, why are we even talking about this? Well, like we've kind of discussed, they continue to develop rules and make changes as time goes on, and so I wouldn't be shocked if they come up with something similar. The thing about equalization with this nickel that was neat is the fact that you've got the local community saying, yes, we need this. We're willing to put up a little bit on our end. And so it was an easy way for the state to not have to put up for the entire state, but for those districts that did say, yes, we are willing to take this, and then the state could match some funds there. Equalization, I'm not great at explaining equalization, although I can say that different districts, equalization would mean different things for different districts. Here in Scott County for us, the nickel provides around $40 million in school funding for construction. Equalization for us is about a 25% of that, about a $10 million lick, whereas in other districts it's more of a one-for-one. And in some districts, I know like Menifee County, for instance, it's well beyond that. I was talking with their finance person, and they were sharing like how much their district.
Estill County's 2-1.
Is it? Okay. Yeah.
What do they use? I know it's growth, I'm sure.
It's property poor, property rich. It all goes back to how much equalization would you get on the front end. So it's based on how we compare to 150% of the amount of assessed value per kid statewide. They assess a single dollar amount for the state, and then we compare it to that, and we're either above it or below it. Logan County was about even. We're 25 cents on the dollar. Estill County is $2 per dollar.
Yeah. So
Property rich gets less.
But again, too, though, but you think 2-to-1, or like in the case of Menifee, it was something along those lines, but the amount that they're generating themselves is not nearly what we're generating 40 million.
Right.
They're generating 267,000.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't even, and we're talking apples and oranges as far as that goes. You can go on to the next one. This one, I've only seen, I think, a couple that this applies to. This essentially is the equalized facility funding nickel. If you didn't receive any equalized growth, and if you hadn't received the recallable nickel, you're eligible for this. So there's a lot of districts that would be eligible for this. I believe Owen County might be one district that I believe that they might have that nickel, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I just know that this is one of the many nickels that doesn't apply to us based on the scenario with that. You game?
So what he's been doing all that construction with this last few years, Rob's done a ton of remodeling.
Yeah,
and renovations.
I think I know what that's talking about, but
Yeah, there's very little discussion about this nickel in any presentation I've seen or with anybody, that I've spoken with about all the different sources of funding.
I'm
Not
not real
familiar
familiar.
with that one? Yeah.
Yeah, I know, I just going through, looking to see who's got it, Paducah Independent did.
Is someone on the list for that?
Yeah, I'm just looking at Seeks, Owen County has it,
Okay,
yes.
that's what I thought. And they got it in 2014, I believe.
This doesn't say, like I said, this is their Seek data I'm just
Sure,
looking at.
sure.
So, but yeah, there's not many that I'm aware of throughout the state that have that, so.
Yeah, I felt like that was, my guess was that was a nickel that was thrown in there to give an opportunity for maybe those districts who didn't see the growth, that were eligible for the original growth nickel and got some of that equalized growth as a result. And then they can't necessarily get the recallable nickel to work through some funding, but I'm not.
Paducah Independent has a recallable nickel as well.
Okay.
Owen does too.
Which I believe that was a change that they ended up making
Pulled
at
out,
some
yeah.
point. Yeah, they pulled it out and said you don't have to, you know, at one point you couldn't get the recallable and then they changed it to where you could.
Yeah.
You can go to the next one. All right, the BRAC nickel. This, I mean, Hardin County is the only county I know of that has this, and this all deals with Fort Knox and realignment of base realignment closure. Generally, that's it. I mean, it's pretty much a, you know, it's out there, but you're not going to find it for us. You can go on the next one. The last is Category 5 nickel, and this is for those districts that have schools that are in just horrible regard. This is where K-Fix that we've talked about before. K-Fix, when they did the building assessments and the Parsons report, they're trying to figure out what schools had horrible conditions, and they could be granted funds for Category 5 schools. And again, that doesn't. We've got some that some people might say are pretty I don't know, might have problems with, but nowhere near the level of Category 5.
Yeah, I think Fort Thomas, I think they got $10 million this year for an elementary.
Okay.
And they're a
That's
rich
some
district.
old- I guess really old.
Yeah.
I believe one of the I was talking to through this and talking to local districts. One of the districts that ended up levying the recallable nickel were led to believe that the reason they weren't getting Category 5 money for a school is because that's something they hadn't done. That was a pattern they noticed. They noticed the districts that had levied the recallable nickel versus districts that hadn't. And I don't know if that was, they were assuming too much, but that was something that they used as their propaganda moving forward through it though.
It's kind of like a roads project. There's very little money to go around, and you need somebody to say, we want that school in my district to get that.
You go on the next one. All right, seat calculations. Every district has their seat calculation information. It's a big, huge report. I pulled up ours for Scott. This is the place where you can figure out if you don't know and you want to know what nickels you get. Scott County, as you can see, the FSPK, which every district should have SFPK. You can see that we get the FSPK nickel, original growth nickel, equalized growth nickel, and recallable nickel. We do not get the equalized facility funding nickel, the one we talked about that Owen and Pulaski, I think you said, had. Again, the BRAC nickel we don't have, and the Category 5 nickel we don't have. But this is a really easy way for somebody just getting started trying to figure out what they have and don't have and what they can go after. This piece of the seat calculations page is the piece that really would help out with anything pertaining to nickels. All right, this is the tax rates levied before the recallable nickel. So this is in before the recallable nickel for Scott County. The levy equivalent rate is the rate that is used by districts to kind of try and make it more of an apples to apples comparison. On the slide, it's really small, but the point being, within the Big 15, Scott County fell down here at number 10. Scott County was down here number 10 in levied equivalent rate before the recallable nickel. And on the next slide, on after, we jump up to 5th as far as where we come in terms of our tax rate. So that just kind of shows that we're aligned up more close. I'd rather be on the higher side of average than the lower side when talking about about funding and tax rates. This is an interesting couple of slides because, you know, like Bracknickel is on here, and you can see Hardin, only one with it. You can see that Pike has a Category 5 funding coming as well, and then you can see those that are on here for recallable as well. And again, some of this information is a little bit out of date because we've got other districts that went after it at the time we did, or a little bit before, or a little bit after that have changed their information. Again, this is just kind of reviewing the data that I've tried to share and where that data can be found. So if anybody was looking for unmet district need, where you'd go to find the district facility plans that every district has. The nickel facts, where you can find information about all the nickels, and seat calculations, is that's where you can get that seat page for every district, and then the tax rates that were levied. That also shows you again the links to specifically finding those documents. That's all that page is for. All right, with the research, so there was some things we were looking at with this. Two big strategies can be employed, or two that we've talked about, and that is being, you know, the shout from the rooftops, you know, being super transparent, having a plan and communicating that plan. Or the Dr. Hub trademarked run silent, run deep, which is more of a trademarked in term. I don't know the trademarked in application, but that's more of a, you know, you do the bare minimum of what you need to do, and then you're not talking to anybody about anything, and you're trying to let the timelines run its course and just the chips fall where they may. Another piece to the puzzle on ways to approach the nickel is if people are intentional or not about their timing. There's a thought that, you know, cold weather could be a factor in making it difficult for people to launch a petition. So that was interesting, and that was something that I looked at with this. And then the last thing that you'll see districts do is tying it to a specific need. So these were kind of the things that were being looked at, and so what I tried to do was get everybody from 2010 on up and get some information from them, but I was finding difficulty getting just information at all because of the fact that, you can go on the next slide, because of the fact that you've got superintendent turnover, central office turnover, and so it was kind of difficult to find. So we're trying to figure out, again, what factors make the attempt more likely to pass. We talked about some of those on the other side. Next slide. Talk to you a little bit about that, about the tracking down of people and how that was difficult for me to do. But in the end, there were about, I think there were 23 districts. There were 23 districts that have successfully levied the recallable nickel from 2015 on, or 2015 on. And of those, we were able to get a response from 11 of those individuals. You can go on to the next page. And this is just the following district personnel that responded. You know, I just think this is probably good because if anyone else were to be looking at this from another district, they might know people to reach out to, and they might know people that didn't respond that they might have better luck than I did with. You can go on the next one. So 8 questions were asked, and it was all about their approach. You know, how would you describe the approach? Was it intentionally transparent, intentionally quiet, or would you describe it in some other way? What's the deal with your communication plan? Was it minimal? Was it detailed? What time of year did you launch your campaign? Was it tied to a specific need? Did you encounter a petition? Did you encounter a vote? Had your district ever launched into this before and been unsuccessful? And is there anything that you learned from unsuccessful attempts that helped you on this one? So that was kind of the focus of what we were looking for. It was pretty, I really honestly didn't know what I would see in terms of everybody's approach, to be honest. I kind of figured we'd probably see about, I don't know, 2/3 or 3/4 that went the transparent approach. But in the end, everybody was super transparent about this. I mean, that was the one, one thing that I was kind of, I don't know if I was surprised. I guess I was a little surprised because I expected a little bit more variety out of it, but that wasn't the case. With the level of detail in their communication plan, this is where you really had to look at kind of their responses, because 6 out of 11 respondents, they did describe their communication plan as detailed. The rest also described it as detailed, but they used other terms. It was detailed, but we streamlined it. Or it was detailed, but we simplified it for our community. It was detailed, but we focused on these 2 things. So in some cases, even though there was a level of detail, I guess they just really honed in on what they thought was gonna make a difference. So in the end, even though 6 of 11 described it as detailed, everybody had a detailed plan that they were going with. 3 respondents were intentional with the timing. Only 1 expressed taking advantage of cold weather. The other two, it wasn't so much for the cold weather. 1 was intentional with their timing because they said they clearly did not want it to be at the same time that was the typical time for rates. They wanted it to be intentionally at a different time so that people, had a chance to really talk about it and they could just, I don't know, they thought that was the way to go. Then there was somebody else that said, well, we intentionally lined it up with when rates go, and we backwards planned from that so that by the time we got there, there was plenty of time, everybody was happy. You go on the next one. 10 of the 11 districts did tie the need and the push for the recallable nickel to a specific facility. 1 district didn't, and well, they did and they didn't. They tied it to a cafeteria, the high school cafeteria, I believe it was, the first time around that they went for it, and they were not successful. So they were a little bit fearful that, some of that might have been the fact that they were just tying it to that. So they said, we are planning on using the funds generated for this cafeteria. However, if we aren't able to raise enough for this, we still have all these other needs. So they kind of tied it to a specific need, but they kind of had a backup plan in there too, to where, there wouldn't be pushback from the community on saying, well, you're not going to make enough with this to fund what you want to fund. They had a backup plan for that. 6 of 11 faced a petition, and then the level of action when they faced the petition, it did vary. It did vary with how they responded at that point. And then 3 of the 6 ended up facing a vote. And the one thing I did notice is that with whatever strategy that they used when they faced a petition, they stuck to it for the vote. Some were super proactive with their campaign on the petition. Some were just really kind of general. One of my favorite strategies was a district that they launched a campaign to inform potential people that were signing the petition that, just so you know, that petition is a public record, and our education associations will be looking at the names on this public record. And there was some concern from the community that, well, wait a minute, they didn't tell us that. So then they felt like the petitioners weren't on the forefront and didn't tell them of something that they should have known. And I would have never thought about that one. I thought that was kind of interesting. And then 4 of 11 respondents did report a previous attempt by their district prior to a successful attempt. This was where I would have liked to, I'm sure there's districts out there that have been launching 1 or multiple unsuccessful attempts, and they haven't quite got to the successful attempt yet. I was wanting to find them, but there's really no source of data to find them, and I don't know if I would have gotten a nice scope of information from that. So we just focused on the ones that were successful. Prior to that, when they were unsuccessful, what was the issues with that? And timing was blamed in one case. The economic state of the community was blamed in another, and then distrust and just overall, maybe going for too much, too fast was the case in a couple of other districts. So, from all of this, I don't know that I came away from anything that I don't feel like I already knew prior to talking to all these different people. However, it does make me feel a little bit more 100% like I'm crystal clear in knowing that, okay, yeah, this is for sure what you do. You know, for instance, the run silent, run deep, you know, knew it was out there, but I don't know. Now, I think not only in the fact that everybody was transparent, but in all the circumstances that we discussed with being transparent, there was a lot of justification with their answers for, well, you know, here's why we thought about doing this, and I don't see any reason not to be really transparent and intentional with it. Having a communication plan, whatever that communication plan is, doesn't matter if it is tailored to your community or if it's just very vast in information. I think having that communication plan is important. The one thing that was interesting with the timing piece is, I didn't really talk about it on the slide when we were talking about the timing, but the big thing with the timing was everybody kind of just said, look, we were in such dire need, we didn't care. You know, we needed it, and we just attacked it and went after it, and as fast as we could get things done, we got things done. In some cases, the timing did coordinate with winter months, so they weren't saying that was a bad thing, but it was one of those things where, you know, timing, like I said, timing's not a luxury. It's one of those things where a lot of times you're going after as fast as you can. Definitely, I'd say tie it to a specific need. You know, here in Scott County, we had, well, I mean, you could say the high school was our specific need, but we had a lot we could tie it to. Other districts, it's been interesting to see that the size of the district, a lot of times, the size of the need correlates. You know, because again, smaller districts that I talk to, the interesting piece on that is that, you know, a lot of times here we're talking about a huge, you know, $70 million project. Well, they're talking about something that compared to that seems small, but, you know, for them it's just tremendous. So I don't know, it was just interesting to see that piece. And then when a petition and a vote comes, stick to the plan. Everybody, and especially the districts that were unsuccessful in a time before, they seemed even more, they were even more organized, I guess, and more sound in the thought of, you know, we spent all the time on the front end figuring out what our plan was, and when push came to shove and we got the petition and we got the vote, we stuck to what we were planning on doing. We stuck to the consistent communication we started out with. In a lot of cases, I believe Harlan Independent, I talked to their superintendent, Mr. Morton, and he was talking about the fact that, you know, from the time before, he had a lot of resources already done. So he just would pull out the resources they had from the time before and went at it that way.